Rancher heard screams for weeks, until the Bigfoot dragged someone from the woods. I lived alone for 15 years, just me, the wind, and the silence. Then one night I heard it, a scream not from any animal I knew, not the wind. It was human, and it came again. Every night. Same time, 2:47 a.m., always the same. They said I was hearing things, but I knew better. Someone was out there. And then I saw him. The thing they called a monster. The Bigfoot. He didn't run, didn't growl. He just looked at me, then stepped aside. And that's when I saw her. A girl. Barely breathing. Eyes hollow, but alive. He had saved her. Dragged her from a place no one dared to go. Later I found a note in my journal. Not in my handwriting. It said, "You listened. Thank you." You see, sometimes the ones we fear the most are the ones who hear us when no one else will. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. It was winter in Montana. Thick fog, a sky the color of steel, and a lonely cabin standing at the edge of the pines. The wind scraped against the wooden walls, carrying the smell of cold ash and pine resin. Inside, a single oil lamp burned low, its light trembling across the pages of a worn leather journal. Elias Boone, 54, sat beside the fire, the flames reflecting off the scar on his left hand. For 15 years he had lived alone on this land. The fire that took his wife and son had also taken his will to leave. He stayed because silence, though cruel, was all he had left. Then at 2:47 a.m. the silence broke. A scream, thin, distant, and human, cut through the wind. At first Elias thought it was a coyote, or maybe the groan of a tree under frost. But the sound came again. Raw, trembling pleading. It carried the ache of someone alive and desperate. For 3 weeks the scream returned at the exact same hour. Each night he wrote it down. Each night he doubted himself more. Maybe it wasn't real. Maybe grief had finally taken root in his mind. Until one night when the scream came so close, it rattled the window glass. Lantern in hand, Elias stepped outside into the snow. The air stood still. The world held its breath. And there, beneath the window, he saw it, a footprint deep and wide, far larger than any man's. The wind died. The night froze. Only the faint echo remained. Help me. Part 1. The Pattern. The morning came slow and pale, buried beneath a blanket of white fog, the kind that swallowed the world whole. The sky hung low over the frozen valley, pressing against the fields like a lid. The air smelled of wet pine and the faint trace of burnt wood drifting from the stove inside. Elias Boone stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching over thin ice. He had barely slept. The memory of that scream still echoed in his head, sharp and distant, like a bell lost in the wind. He stared toward the woods, the same place the sound had come from, nothing but gray trees and shifting mist. In his hand he held a small reel-to-reel recorder, old but steady. It had belonged to his late wife, Clara. She used it once to capture the sound of birds before dawn, back when the world was still soft. Elias brushed the dust from its metal case, ran his thumb along the worn tape, and placed it on the railing. "If I'm going crazy," he muttered, "I want to hear it for real." He pressed record. The machine hummed to life, its tape spinning slow and steady. Then nothing but wind, the sound of the world breathing. That night at 2:47 the scream came again. The recorder caught it, thin, broken, rising from somewhere deep among the trees. Elias played it back 3 times before the fire went cold. The voice didn't waver. It was the same pitch, the same rhythm, the same human terror threaded through the dark. By the second night the pattern held. Same hour, same direction, always from the north. Elias began keeping a notebook beside the recorder. Each page was marked with the time, the temperature, and a crude drawing of the valley. He'd trace the direction the sound came from, like charting a storm that refused to move. But something else began to appear on the tapes. Between the screams, breathing, deep, guttural, and close. Like something trying not to be heard. It was too heavy to be human, too slow to be a machine. Elias listened again with his ear pressed close. The breaths came in pairs, followed by a faint thump as if footsteps echoed through the static. The realization sank cold into his stomach. Whatever was out there wasn't alone. On the fifth night, the scream cracked midway, breaking into a low moan, then silence. Elias played the tape back over and over, searching for an answer inside the noise. He turned the volume high enough for the speakers to distort. That's when he heard it again, a sound buried beneath the static, soft but real. A second voice, not a scream this time, a whisper, faint, trembling, impossible. "Help. Me." Elias froze, staring at the recorder. His breath turned to fog before his face. He spent the next few days pacing between the porch and the tree line. He barely ate. He barely slept. Each night he sat by the window waiting. And every time the clock hit 2:47, the sound returned closer now, louder, clearer. Sometimes he thought he could make out words. Other times, just the rise and fall of a breath trying to survive the cold. He began to remember the fire. That night 15 years ago when Clara's voice had broken through the smoke calling his name. The same tone, desperate human pleading. He had reached for her hand, but the beam above them had collapsed. By the time he dragged her out, the house was gone. So was the light in her eyes. Now, sitting by that same stove, Elias couldn't tell if what he heard was real or his guilt speaking back to him. On the 21st night, the pattern broke. The storm outside had grown fierce snow, clawing at the windows like fingers. Elias sat wrapped in his old coat, the recorder turning quietly beside him. The fire had died to embers. Then, without warning, the machine stopped. The reels froze mid-spin. He reached out to check the tape, but a sudden gust slammed against the wall. The door creaked open an inch. The flame flickered once, then went out. Darkness. Elias stood slowly. The only light came from the faint glow of the snow beyond the doorway. He could hear the wind, but beneath it something else, the soft crush of footsteps. He stepped outside, lantern trembling in his hand. The night was silent, the kind of silence that hums in the bones. Then he saw them, a trail of prints in the snow, wide and deep, leading away from the porch toward the forest. Each one spaced far apart, as if made by something tall, something that moved with purpose. Elias crouched, pressed his gloved hand into one of the impressions. His fingers didn't even reach the edges. No shoe, no tread, just bare skin. He rose, eyes fixed on the darkness between the trees. That's when he felt it. A breath wet, heavy, close enough to stir the hair at the back of his neck. It carried the scent of earth and damp fur. He turned sharply. Nothing. Just the emptiness of his porch and the whisper of snow. But in the stillness, he could swear he heard it again. A low, drawn-out exhale. Almost human. Almost not. Then the wind started up once more, erasing the prints, smothering the moment in white. Elias stepped back into the cabin, shut the door, and locked it twice. He didn't light the fire. Didn't move. Just sat in the dark, listening to the tape spinning again on its own backward this time. And beneath the static, through the hum of the machine, came a voice so faint it could have been a dream. "You're not alone." The words faded, but the echo stayed like something breathing just beyond the walls. Part 2. The Shadow in the Woods. The North Woods had a name whispered in the town below Hollow Pines. Folks said the name came from the way the trees sounded in the wind, a hollow moan that rolled through the valley at night. Some said it was the trees themselves mourning for those who never came back. Elias Boone had never believed in stories. But that morning when he saw the line of prints leading north the world, he thought he understood, began to thin. The snow there was untouched except for the tracks, wide, deep, and spaced too far apart for any man to make. 2 yards between each step, the imprints clean as if pressed by a living giant. The edges hadn't frozen yet. Whatever left them had passed through only hours before. Elias carried an oil lantern in one hand and his father's rifle in the other. He told himself it was for protection, but he knew the weapon wouldn't matter against something that walked like that. He moved slow through the fog, every crunch of snow beneath his boots echoing like thunder. The forest pressed close around him, its silence a living thing. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a crow gave a single cry and then stopped. The sound vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by the mist. He followed the tracks deeper into Hollow Pines. The trees grew older here, tall and tight, their bark silvered by age. The ground dipped unevenly, littered with fallen branches that cracked softly underfoot. The further he went, the colder the air became. It wasn't just winter's cold, it was the still suffocating chill of being watched. He paused and turned, lantern raised. Nothing. Just the swirling gray. But when he moved again, a second set of footprints appeared beside the first, smaller, lighter, walking the same path. By midday, the sky had darkened to the color of lead. Snow began to fall in slow, deliberate flakes. Elias stopped to rest by a fallen tree, set the rifle across his lap, and listened. Wind moved through the pines, soft and whispering, and somewhere beyond it a low hum. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. The sound of something large, exhaling steady and measured. He lifted the lantern, peering through the fog. The light caught on something ahead, a shimmer of movement, subtle and high. He squinted. Between the trunks a shape emerged. At first he thought it was a tree, broad, unmoving, but then it shifted. Shoulders, arms, breath rising like steam. Elias froze. The creature was standing no more than 30 yards away, half veiled in mist. Its form was massive, the height of 2 men, its chest rising and falling with deliberate calm. Black hair matted with frost. Its face partly hidden, but the eyes, those eyes caught the lantern's light and turned it gold. They looked straight at him. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Elias's hand tightened around the rifle. His breath clouded in front of him. His pulse hammered in his ears. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if studying him. There was no snarl, no movement to strike, only a stillness so heavy it felt sacred. Elias's instincts screamed, "Run, shoot, do something," but his body wouldn't obey. He could see now that the snow beneath the creature's feet was marked with the same wide prints that led him here, and beside them smaller ones trailing close. A mother and a child, he realized. Or something like it. The lantern flame flickered. Elias raised the rifle halfway. His arms shook. The sound of his heartbeat drowned out the wind. He thought of Clara again, the way she had reached for him through the smoke eyes, filled not with fear, but with trust. That same look lived in the creature's eyes now. A plea, not a threat. The rifle wavered, then lowered. Elias's breath came in clouds. "You're not here to hurt me, are you?" he whispered, though he knew it couldn't answer. The creature exhaled a sound soft as the wind moving through fur. The mist stirred around its shoulders like breath from the earth itself. Then without a sound it turned. Slowly, gracefully. It walked back into the fog steps, soundless, deliberate. Elias watched as the shape faded, swallowed by the gray. When it was gone, the silence pressed in again. Only the faint sway of branches proved the world was still alive. He lowered the lantern to the ground, staring at the footprints it left behind. The snow melted slightly where the creature had stood, as if it carried heat beneath all that hair. The air smelled faintly of moss and iron. He followed the trail for a few more yards, but it ended at the mouth of a shallow ravine. From there, nothing. No more tracks. Only the sound of dripping water beneath a sheet of ice. Elias stood there for a long time, his breath fogging the air, trying to make sense of what he had seen. When he finally turned back, dusk had begun to settle. The trees stretched like shadows across the white. He walked home without thinking, the rifle slung over his shoulder, the lantern dim. The world around him felt different, emptier, yet somehow alive. As he neared the cabin, he noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. He was sure he had latched it when he left. Inside, the fire had gone out, but the air was still warm. On the table beside his open journal lay the recorder. The reel had been rewound. He frowned, stepping closer. The machine clicked once and started on its own, the tape spinning forward. Static filled the air. Then, faintly breathing. 2 breaths this time. One deep and heavy, one small, quick and frightened. Elias stared at the recorder, frozen. The breaths came again, closer now, followed by a single sound that made the hairs on his arms rise. A soft tap like a knuckle against glass. He turned toward the window. Nothing. But as he leaned closer, his lantern caught the faint outline of a handprint on the frosted pane, 5 long fingers pressed gently into the ice. Not clawed, not violent, just there. He touched the glass. It was warm. Outside, the fog shifted once more. Between the trees, a single golden eye gleamed back before fading into the mist. Elias's rifle slipped from his hand. The silence returned, but it no longer felt empty. Somewhere deep in the woods, something had chosen to let him live. Part 3. The Silence Before. For 3 days the valley slept. No screams, no echoes, no voices buried in the wind. The storm had passed, leaving the land wrapped in a thick hush, the kind of silence that presses against the ears until you can hear your own pulse. The sky was a blank canvas of gray, the trees sagging beneath the weight of new snow. Elias Boone stood on his porch, staring out at the fields that stretched empty and white. The barn roof carried a heavy crust of ice. His horses stood motionless under the awning, their breath rising in soft clouds. Even the crows were gone. He hadn't realized how loud the quiet could be. For 3 weeks he'd lived with that scream, waiting for it, fearing it, needing it. Now that it was gone, the silence felt unnatural, like something stolen. He told himself it was over, that whatever haunted the woods had moved on. But deep down, he didn't believe it. By noon, the fog thickened again. Elias pulled on his coat and went to check the fences along the north pasture. The cold bit at his face. Snow crunched beneath his boots in small, hollow sounds. Halfway down the fence line, something caught his eye. A strip of rope hung from the wooden post, torn, not cut clean. It was weathered, stained dark at the end. He ran a gloved thumb over it, and his stomach turned. Dried blood. He followed the trail further, his breath quickening. Beneath the layer of snow, faint scuffs in the dirt, signs of struggle boots dragging something heavy pulled through. Near the barn door, a patch of snow had melted away, revealing more stains, rust brown against the ice. He crouched down, heart pounding. The marks weren't animal, they were human. Elias straightened and looked toward the woods. The world beyond the fence seemed to lean closer, every tree, a shadow, every shadow a watcher. Inside the barn, the air smelled of hay and old wood. He closed the door behind him, letting the dim light from the window guide his way. His boots sank softly into the straw. Then something fluttered in the corner. He turned, lantern raised. A small piece of paper tumbled through the air, caught in a draft. It landed near his feet. He bent down and lifted it. The edges were torn and soaked with melted snow, but the writing was still visible, uneven, desperate scrawl across the page. Help me. I didn't die. Elias's knees weakened. He read it again as if the words might change, but they didn't. Didn't die, he whispered, voice cracking. For the first time in weeks, he felt the full weight of what the screams had been. Not ghosts, not madness. A real voice, a living person trapped somewhere in those woods. The thought struck him like lightning. Every night that cry had been reaching for him, and he'd done nothing but listen. He sank onto a bale of hay, the paper trembling in his hands. A rush of guilt flooded through him, hot, merciless. Maybe the creature he'd seen wasn't a monster at all. Maybe it was trying to lead him somewhere. That evening, the wind picked up again. Snow began to fall in thin lines, whispering against the windows. Elias lit the lantern and set it by the door. The room glowed faintly gold, flickering with each gust that pressed against the walls. He sat at the table, staring at the piece of paper laid flat before him. Outside, the sky had gone black. For hours, nothing happened. The horses shifted once or twice in the barn. The wood stove popped. Then around midnight, the temperature dropped fast, the kind of cold that sinks into the bones. Elias rubbed his hands, reached to add a log to the fire, and stopped. A sound. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Each one heavier than the last. He turned toward the door, heart hammering. The knocks came again, 3 times spaced evenly steady as a heartbeat. Elias grabbed his lantern and stood. His breath came out in clouds. The last knock sounded as his hand touched the latch. He opened the door. Cold air rushed in thick with snow. The world outside glowed silver beneath the moon, and there, standing in the drift just beyond the porch, was the silhouette. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. The creature's fur shimmered faintly in the lantern light, wet with frost. Steam rose from its body in slow waves. Its eyes caught the glow, a deep amber, calm and strange. But it wasn't alone. On its shoulder hung a limp figure, a woman. Elias's breath caught in his throat. The lantern shook in his hand. The creature stepped forward one careful pace, its weight pressing deep into the snow. It made no sound, no growl. The only noise was the low crack of ice underfoot. Elias could see her now, dark hair matted with dirt skin, pale as the snow around her. Her wrists bore marks, red and raw. The creature held her as though afraid she might break. He wanted to run, to hide, to shout, but all he could do was stare. The creature knelt slowly and laid the woman down on the ground, just within the halo of the lantern's light. Then it looked at him. The eyes weren't wild. They weren't cruel. They were pleading. Elias felt his throat tighten. Every instinct screamed danger, yet the sight before him was anything but. The creature's chest rose and fell with a low tremor, like someone struggling to breathe. He took one cautious step forward. What is this?" he whispered. The creature didn't move. It just stayed there, kneeling, snow gathering on its fur. The woman stirred faintly, a sound escaping her lips, weak, fragile. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. She was alive, barely. He turned to the creature again, words dying in his mouth. For a heartbeat, man and beast locked eyes, two beings bound by something neither could explain. Then, without warning, the creature began to rise. It stood tall, the lantern's glow brushing against its form like light through smoke. Elias braced himself, but it only stepped back, slow and deliberate. The wind swept between them, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The creature gave one last look, a silent understanding, and then turned toward the woods. It disappeared into the fog, its heavy steps fading until there was nothing but the wind. Elias knelt in the snow beside the woman, the lantern's flame trembling in the dark. She was breathing but shallow. Her fingers twitched. When he brushed the hair from her face, she flinched and whispered something so faint he almost missed it. "He saved me." The words hung in the cold air, more haunting than any scream. Elias looked toward the woods again, but there was no movement, no sign of the creature, only the stillness it left behind. He didn't know if it was man-monster or something in between, but one thing was certain. Whatever had haunted him for weeks hadn't come to kill. It had come to save. Part 4. The Body in the Snow. The night held its breath. Moonlight spilled across the field like silver water, coating every branch, every ripple of snow, in a ghostly glow. The wind had died completely. Even the horses in the barn stood silent, their ears tilted toward the cabin. Elias Boone knelt beside the body that the creature had laid before him. His lantern flickered against the snow, its light quivering over the woman's face. Her skin was pale, lips blue at the edges, eyes half open but unfocused. Her clothes hung in tatters, the fabric stiff with frost. Around her wrists and ankles were deep grooves, marks left by rope that had bitten through the flesh. He leaned close, his breath clouding in the cold air. A faint warmth brushed against his palm. A heartbeat. Weak, but there. "She's alive," he whispered almost to himself. The creature Bigfoot, the myth, the shadow of hollow pines, remained crouched a few paces away. Its massive shoulders rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. Steam rolled off its fur in the moonlight. Elias could feel the heat radiating from it, strange and comforting amid the cold. For a long time, neither of them moved. Man and beast caught in a silence that felt sacred. Then slowly the creature shifted. It lifted its gaze to meet his, and in those eyes, amber, deep shimmering with reflection, Elias saw no rage, no hunger, only exhaustion, sadness, and something almost human. It was looking not at him, but at the woman lying in the snow. He realized then it hadn't brought her here to frighten him. It had brought her here to save her. Elias tore off his coat and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. She stirred faintly, a shallow exhale slipping through her lips. Her eyes fluttered, revealing flashes of blue beneath the frost. "Easy," he murmured, his voice breaking. "You're safe now. You're safe." The creature's chest rumbled a low, muted sound, not unlike a sigh. Elias turned toward it, his pulse hammering. "You found her, didn't you?" he said, voice trembling. "You've been the one—" The creature tilted its head just slightly as though listening. Its breath fogged the air between them. Elias pressed his hand to the woman's neck again. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. He looked up, meeting the creature's gaze once more. Whatever fear he had felt these past weeks, the dread, the disbelief seemed to melt away beneath that look. There was something ancient in those eyes, something that spoke of a grief as old as the mountains around them. For the first time, Elias understood the forest wasn't haunted. It was guarded. The woman's lips moved. At first, no sound came out. Then a whisper. "He saved me." The words barely broke the stillness, but they hit Elias like thunder. He looked from her to the creature. Its massive hand rested briefly on the snow beside her head, palm down, fingers splayed, gentle, deliberate. When it withdrew, the snow beneath was slightly melted, as if the warmth it carried was alive. Elias found his voice, though it trembled. "Why?" he asked, softly. "Why help her? Why me?" The creature didn't answer, of course. It couldn't. But its eyes said enough. They spoke of nights long past, of pain, of loss, of something that once had been hunted and misunderstood. It looked at Elias as though recognizing that same loneliness within him. And maybe it did. A gust of wind swept through the trees, scattering snow like ashes. The creature straightened to its full height. Elias rose too, the woman still bundled in his coat. The two stood facing one another under the cold light of the moon man and legend, bound by an unspoken truth that kindness can exist even where fear has lived for centuries. The creature glanced once more at the woman, then back to Elias. Its breath came in slow, measured waves. Then it stepped forward. Elias stiffened his instincts, screaming, but he didn't move. The creature stopped just within reach and extended one massive hand. In its palm lay something small, round, smooth, the color of old bone. A carved stone pendant. A circle with a hollow center, threaded by what looked like a strand of animal sinew. Elias hesitated, then reached out. The creature placed the charm gently in his hand. Its skin, if that's what it was, felt strangely warm, like the bark of a tree catching sunlight. For a moment, its fingers lingered against his, a wordless exchange that carried more weight than sound ever could. Then it pulled away. The creature took a step back, eyes never leaving his. Then another. Its form began to blur as the fog rolled in from the trees, wrapping around it like smoke. Elias felt an ache rise in his chest. He wanted to speak, to thank it, to ask where it came from, but he knew words would fail. As the mist deepened, the creature turned its head toward the forest. For a heartbeat, its profile caught the moonlight, strong, solemn, almost human. Then it was gone. The snow stirred in its wake, swirling up like breath before fading into stillness. Elias stood there for a long while, the pendant clutched in his hand, the woman breathing softly against his chest. He looked down at her, at the frost melting from her lashes, at the faint pulse in her throat, and something inside him shifted. For 15 years, he had believed himself cursed by the fire that had taken his family. But now, kneeling in the snow beside a stranger, saved by something he once feared, he felt that weight begin to lift. He glanced at the charm again. It was simple, but the carving bore intent, care, meaning, a token of gratitude maybe, or of trust. He turned toward the forest one last time. The wind had picked up again, sighing through the trees. Somewhere deep inside, he imagined he could still hear it breathing, not as a growl, but as a rhythm. Slow, peaceful, the same rhythm he'd heard on those recordings, the same heartbeat that had haunted his nights. Except now it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a farewell. Elias pressed the pendant to his chest and whispered into the cold air, "Thank you." The forest didn't answer, but the silence that followed felt different, softer, somehow alive. Part 5. The Return of Light. Dawn came gently, like a secret whispered to the earth. The storm had passed, leaving the sky painted in soft strokes of pink and gold. Frost shimmered across the valley, and the forest, once a wall of black shadow, now glowed faintly under the first light of day. Elias Boone sat by the hearth tending to the fire. Across from him, the woman lay beneath layers of blankets. Her breathing was steadier now, her color returning little by little. The coat he'd wrapped around her was still damp from the snow, but warmth had finally begun to find her. He cleaned the wounds on her wrists, binding them with strips of linen torn from an old bedsheet. She flinched once or twice, but did not wake. Each time she stirred, he whispered quietly, "You're safe. It's over now." When the radio crackled to life, Elias hesitated. He hadn't touched it in years, but now he reached for the receiver with a trembling hand. "Sheriff's office," came a voice through the static. Elias swallowed hard. "This is Boone. Elias Boone. I found someone. A woman. She's alive, but she's hurt." There was silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Alive out there?" "Yes," Elias said. "You'd better send someone fast." By noon, the cabin was alive with voices and movement. Deputies in thick coats, paramedics kneeling beside the woman, flashbulbs from a local paper flickering like lightning. They asked him the same question again and again. "Where did you find her? Who did this to her?" Elias told them the truth. At first they stared. Then they laughed. "Bigfoot," one deputy said, half smiling. "You sure it wasn't just a bear, Boone?" But Elias didn't argue. He just nodded once and said quietly, "Bears don't carry people out of the woods." When the sheriff asked him again later, voice soft with pity, Elias only replied, "What's in those woods isn't what you think, and it's not what you should be afraid of. The thing that scares me most is our silence." No one wrote that part down. 2 days later, a detective brought news from the lab. The woman's name was Rachel Hines. She'd gone missing 12 years ago from a town nearly 60 miles north. They'd found her car near a logging road, doors, locked, keys still in the ignition. The case had gone cold long before most people remembered her name. When Elias heard, he felt the ground shift beneath him. 12 years. All that time she'd been alive, and something out there had been keeping her that way. The town buzzed with speculation cults, kidnappers, wilderness hermits, but no one dared mention what Elias had seen. To them, it was easier to believe in monsters than in miracles. Rachel was taken to a hospital downstate. Reporters swarmed, doctors whispered, but she spoke to no one. The only words she said before they sedated her were to a nurse who later told Elias in a hushed tone, "He saved me." The tall one, with the kind eyes. That night, Elias sat alone in his cabin staring at the fire. The world outside was silent again, the forest blanketed in snow. He poured himself a cup of coffee that went untouched. The events of the past nights played over in his mind like a reel of old film, the scream, the tracks, the meeting in the fog, the woman's broken whisper. And that moment, just before the creature left, when its gaze had met his one last time. He thought of the pendant now resting on the table, the carved circle of stone. It glowed faintly in the firelight, simple but powerful, like an echo of breath turned solid. Elias reached for his old journal, the same one he'd used to record the nights of the screams, and flipped through its pages. Then he froze. Near the back, on a blank sheet he knew he hadn't written on, there were words scrawled in rough, uneven handwriting. "You finally listened. Thank you." He stared for a long moment, unsure whether to feel fear or peace. But what settled in his chest wasn't terror. It was warmth. He traced the words with a fingertip, then closed the book gently and set it beside the pendant. Later that evening, the wind picked up again. Not harsh, not wild, just enough to make the pines whisper. Elias sat by the window, the lantern burning low, watching snowflakes drift through the pale light of the moon. From deep within the woods came a sound, not a scream, not a cry. Footsteps. Slow, steady, fading in and out with the rhythm of the wind. He didn't move, didn't open the door, just listened. The sound grew softer, farther, until it became one with the forest, like the heartbeat of the land itself saying goodbye. Elias smiled faintly. For the first time in years, his hands stopped trembling. He leaned back in his chair, the fire's glow flickering across his face. The pendant caught the light one last time before swinging gently in the air as if someone unseen had brushed past it. He whispered into the stillness, "Rest easy, friend." Outside, the horizon began to brighten, the first blush of morning spreading across the valley. The light slid between the trees, turning the frost into a sea of tiny stars. For a moment, the cabin, the forest, and the man inside all seemed to breathe in unison. And somewhere deep in hollow pines, unseen, but felt a shadow moved once more, then vanished with the dawn. Sometimes what we fear the most is the only thing that truly hears us. When we choose to listen instead of judge, even nature itself thanks us in the gentlest silence. Elias Boone sat at his desk, the last ember in the stove flickering low. He closed his leather journal with a quiet sigh, his rough hands resting on the cover. Outside, the world was calm again. No cries, no footsteps, just the wind breathing softly through the pines. He glanced toward the window. The moonlight stretched across the field, faintly illuminating a line of enormous footprints leading toward the forest, then fading slowly into the mist. Elias smiled, a sadness and peace mingling in his eyes. He whispered almost to the night itself, "You're welcome." The lantern dimmed, and the cabin settled back into silence. But if you listened close beneath the sigh of the wind, there was still a rhythm, soft, patient, like the echo of a heartbeat that never truly left. If you believe that kindness can reach even the most mysterious of creatures, hit follow. I've got more stories to tell.